Eastern Time. We are uniting as one to call down divine enlightenment over the earth and all life forms. So join us for 5 minutes or the full hour for this worldwide event online in the comfort of your own home. Tune in live to uprntalkradio.com or the UFRO Paranormal Radio YouTube channel. Or you can go to our website and our forum site, worldenlightenment2021.org. That's WORLDENLIGHTENMENT 2021.org for more information on this World Enlightenment 2021 event on December 24th, 5 to 6 p.m. We are all coming together in harmony. So let light unite. Think Quantum Leap, World Enlightenment now.
Yes. Thank God that commercial. I'm not cutting the commercial. It kept blanking out or something. I don't know what it was doing, but did it start blanking out on you? Like kind of you couldn't hear it? But anyway, welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night. It's 10/29/2021, 7:06 p.m. Central. And we got Wham representing here with us tonight. How's it going, Wham?
Oh, it's just fab. Today is fab. Today's a good day.
That's good. Why is it so good? Spread the cheer. What happened?
I like the time of year it is. I don't know. Some good stuff happened today. You know, it's just.
That's good.
Yeah, it's just nice.
I understand. WritersOfTheFuture.com. Check that out. Also, the network's having a big Halloween shindig tomorrow, Sunday night at 9 Central. Me and Christina are going to be there dressed up a little bit. I have some plague doctor mask or something. I'm not going to do anything too crazy, but to try out my Yeti microphone there too, and hopefully that lets 2 people talk at one time. So a lot of stuff. Hopefully we'll be there, but that's at 9 p.m. Central Sunday night on Halloween. So the one big thing I have to do is I just finished What We Do in the Shadows season finale. Had to finish the Creep Show season finale, and then I have to watch Halloween Kills, which I know it seems like it's just a brutal bloodbath, but I'm going to watch it anyway. But it's the second one. There's so many who can keep up anymore. But tonight's guest, Nathaniel Gillis. How's it going, Nathaniel?
Hey, man, it's going good. I'm happy to be with you guys for my first time on the show. And we're going to get into some really scary stuff. So it's good that it's happening tonight, right? At this particular Halloween.
All month has kind of been the Halloween show, but this is the pivot. This is the one, right. The Halloween show for sure. I tried to keep them up spooky, but this is the climax for sure. We had one dude here that had a hearse in Tampa, Florida, and he sells ice cream out of it called Frozen Stiffs. And he'd never done an interview before. And he's like done some goth DJing and stuff. That was pretty cool for sure. But he has a freezer he made of a coffin in the back, and he sells ice cream out of it.
Oh my goodness!
That's pretty. And then John Russell was our last guest. Well, it's great to have you here for sure. So let's first off. I'm sure this is one everyone asks, but you say you're a demonologist. Tell us what your classification of that is. What is that?
Well, I am not a systematic demonologist. Systematic demonology is more of your Catholic exorcistic rites. Mine is a little bit more Middle Eastern. I take the approach that the exorcistic rite originated prior to the Bible being written, and even in the Bible, Numbers 19:11 is the act of cleansing someone from corpse pollution. And so I come at it in a different way. I do not believe that demons are horns and hooves. I do believe that they are what's called demonized consciousness. They're dead people that our ancestors basically described as demons. And so that's kind of my approach to the field. As of late, in my research regarding demonology and the connections it has with UFO abduction phenomenon, I'm starting to gravitate to an almost an indefinable, in a sense, term for my research. So right now I'm known as a demonologist, but the behavioral patterns and what I've been researching as of late, it's growing into something deeper and a lot more vast than I anticipated.
Cool. Well, basically, just to give you a little rundown of the history of the show, me and Wham both have had many experiences. And just to give you a summary, my experiences, kind of the catalyst for that was when I was 17. I went through testicular cancer and had to go through chemo and all that stuff. And then a year or so later, my dad died, and I started to have crazy things happen with UFO stuff, beings of light, ghosts, and witnesses with me seeing this stuff as well. And I don't know if I've ever been abducted. If so, they've mind wiped the crap out of me because I don't remember anything like that. But I've seen weird stuff over many houses that I've lived at and been like, what in the hell? That seems like it's here for me or something, just so bizarre on that kind of a level. And Joe, are you there? Because I hear something. I don't know. Joe's in the room, but I heard some kind of skedaddle on the microphone.
Oh,
But anyway, there he
left.
goes.
He's left now.
He's stalking us. I swear to God, a pig just bit my toes under the table. It's a mini pig. Oh my gosh. Run from them. But anyway, the point I'm at now is I live with my fiance Christina. We're getting married in December, but we're taking care of her grandmother here with some hospice care because she's a nurse and her grandmother passed away. And lately at this house, there's been some phenomenon happening that's been kind of bizarre. And I don't think it's the grandmother. I could be wrong. But there was one incident that a glass blew up on the countertop, a crystal glass. No one was near it. I had never seen anything like that. And there may be a scientific explanation, but it was just very bizarre. And they're very thick glasses. This was a while back, earlier in the year. Another weird thing that happened here is there was something hit the bed. When we were sleeping in the bed and we were asleep, something hit it. And I got up with a flashlight and thought something fell on the bed from a shelf or something. Nothing fell on the bed. Something weird hit that bed, and it scared the crap out of us. And Michelle Desrochers, she's on the network as well. She's done some clearing kind of stuff here. And I was just going to tell you about some of the things that she had brought up that were here. And I think there's something to it, though. You hear some of it and you're like, that's pretty weird. I mean, I'm open to it because obviously I've seen weird stuff. So, but one of the things that she said that they found here was a small, kind of like a demonic being that was kind of like a golem, or she called it a golem.
A golem, yeah.
And that it could amplify fights and feed off kind of energy and stuff like that. That one keeps coming up a lot every time she clears, like it keeps coming back or something. And there's been some other stuff with grays and things like that. And even they said something about an interstellar demon, which was kind of crazy. I was like, what? Okay. I'm open to that, but that's still crazy as hell, right? But I've seen a lot of weird beings in my time, so I'm open to it. It's just there's that part of you that's like, what the, trying to accept it, I guess.
You almost don't want it to be real. You know what I mean? You're like, no, as long as it's like being a giraffe that sticks its head into the sand or something, or you know what I mean, doesn't exist.
Yes. Well, when it comes to, does that little small one sound familiar to you? Because is that something that you're familiar with?
I am familiar with it, but what I've encountered in my research and even the manifestations I've seen in houses, these entities will manifest in all sorts of ways. Even like an apparition. When I was 8 years old, I encountered my very first full-bodied apparition. And even then, that entity mutated, right? It would emerge as shadow figures sometimes, but it would take different shapes. And I mean, I've had cases where these entities will manifest as dead people. It's not the dead person. It's not that I don't believe ghosts exist in that sense of the word, but yes, these entities can manifest in many different ways. And I think that the biggest issue within the field is that a lot of us have been confusing all of these entities and saying, okay, then we kind of compartmentalize them instead of acting as if these are apparitional manifestations and as if these entities can manipulate us by the way they appear to us. I think that's a very big point that needs to be made.
And when it comes to these entities, do you have what would you consider your spiritual belief system? Do you kind of have a Christian perspective or something else? Satan and hell and demons and spawns. Is that where they're coming from, or is it something else entirely?
I think it's that as well. I do believe that people employ the terminology demon spawn, which I believe is the hybridization program and UFO abduction phenomenon. But again, we have to define our terms. So to answer your question properly, I grew up in evangelicalism. And at the same time I was going to this local church, I was also growing up in a haunted house. And so the manifestations that I was experiencing did not fit in the blueprint of demonology that I had inherited. And so as a young person, I had to make a decision, a very painful one. Either I limit myself to the dogmatism that wanted me to believe in just strictly their version of demonology, or did I want to yield to the data, right, and say, okay, what I'm experiencing is larger. And I do believe it's larger. So do I believe that these entities are what Judaism calls the Shadim? Yes, they are. Do I believe that they're fallen angels? Yes, they are. But I think that as a researcher, especially in the field of demonology, we have to properly define our terms. So this is very important. Even before we start getting into the literature in Genesis 6 and what these fallen angels are, we have to define what they were. And comparative etymology and comparative religions, malakim, which is where your Hebrew language gets angel, it meant deceased ancestor. It was a form of ghost. Okay, and so that's why in the New Testament, when you have Peter's family, they thought he was dead, but he's knocking on their door, right? And so they said this must be Peter's malak. What do you mean? They're not saying it's his angel, right? Unless we have angels that look like us. No. What they're saying is it must be Peter's ghost. So that is a very fundamental understanding that we must, as researchers, grasp before we even begin the discussion of the origin of evil, of Genesis 6, fallen angels, and what it means to fall. And I think that once I got a grasp of that, started to read this literature, that's when my demonology changed. So am I Christian, my Christian demonologist, Jewish demonologist? I think that every monotheistic religion has a percentage of truth. But I don't want to limit myself to one area of the field. I think it's all of the above and none of the above.
Gotcha. Well, one of my big ones has been seeing beings of light, and I've seen those in the heavens. I've seen 2 of them leave my house, and I don't really know if they were angels or deceased loved ones leaving, but how often does that come up where they're like shining beings of light, and what would you consider
shining
some of those?
Ones. Yes. Now this is this being, this entity that we become, I suppose. It's mentioned first in the Atrahasis epic, and it was called, it's basically a being of light, but it's called the Lil Spirit. What it suggests is that the soul of a mortal is made from the flesh of a god. And so in ancient demonology, what they believed is that when you died, you became a being of light. And then that being of light was characterized as what's called a Lil Spirit, an L-I-L. Now, in Mesopotamian demonology, your Hebrew demonology took that concept, that Lil Spirit, right? That afterlife motif, right? When a person dies, they become a being of light. They took that and they said that this Lil Spirit is a species of spirit. Okay, so it's somebody that died, they became a light form. And so then they realized, and throughout their experiences, that these little spirits were starting to come to their men and women and were manifesting to them in different ways. They were experimenting with and on them and were copulating with them. So copulating is just a formal word for they were having physical relations with them. Now, this is all according to your Jewish demonology. Now, one of the demons that they encountered in Judaism, they called Lilith. Not that Lilith was an actual being, more so that it was a species. What I just taught you guys, it was a Lil Spirit.
Lilith.
Right, but it manifested specific, it's very unique behavior pattern. it manifested as a female, but it would also groom a man into a physical relationship. I don't know. There's some shows I can say things, and I don't want to go too far with that. But you guys get the point here, right?
Don't say the F-bomb. That's the only one that gets me in trouble.
No, I would never do that. I never have. I don't care.
You can say having sex or copulating.
Okay, yeah.
Copulating.
So
Copulating.
these entities would copulate with men, and then they would take the biological excretions, and then they would go to a woman, appear as a man, and then inseminate them. It's very important. It's the very first behavioral pattern in history that links to the UFO abduction phenomenon. But our ancestors knew these entities as little spirits. Now, and that's, to answer your question, that's the light beings. And I don't want to go into pictures. We have a lot of time to cover this stuff, but yes, I've heard of that, and I do believe they exist.
Well, the show's an hour and 55 minutes, but let me know if you need less time or anything like that. But
we're good.
So weird as I know this sounds goofy, but Bigfoot, do you consider that Nephilim, or maybe some of them may be kind of demonic? Because it seems like there's different kinds. We've had some stuff like that where we've heard a weird noise in the woods and the mom thought something big ran outside. Just weird stuff that seemed kind of Bigfootish. But do you consider that something in particular when it comes to like demonology?
I don't at this point in my research. I say that because there are two guiding theories right now that it is the lineage of, like an ape-like creature, or that's even interdimensional. So in my research, I think that it's up in the air for me right now. Now, I'll tell you what, though, the language that it tends to use is reminiscent of a necromancer, which we'll get into here shortly. The whispering, the chattering, the buzzing noise. It's something that our ancestors encountered many times. But in terms of where do I put Bigfoot in the research, I don't know yet. I'm still contemplating where he belongs.
Definitely. I've heard some people say they've said, Christian kind of things and it went away. But I would like to think there's some that are of the light and perhaps there's some that are not. But there's so many different things about that. But definitely necromancy. Let's get into that for sure. The necromancer. Can you remember the Judas Priest song? Necromancer. Yeah.
So when I started digging into the ancient literature and looking for what I knew to be true in terms of the abduction phenomenon, I encountered a species that carried the same characteristics, had the same manifestations, had the same messages, and truthfully, I believe and wholeheartedly the same intent. In history, we were being invaded by the impossible. And what was happening is that these little spirits, that once they died, they began to try to live again in this dimension. They would attempt to be reborn into this world by being reborn through the womb. And so these little spirits, these people that had died, they would start possessing people and possessing things. And so one of the things that's fascinating is in antiquity we have the phenomenon of the teraphim. Now, the teraphim was first introduced as a way of worshiping an idol. It's a way of worshiping these little spirits. What our ancestors would do is they would go and take a piece of metal, a small piece of metal, and they would carve the name of an unclean spirit on it, someone who had died. And the consciousness of that deceased disincorporate spirit would then possess the metal that they carved the name into. So the consciousness merged with metal. At that point, the necromancer would implant, UFO abduction, implant that small piece of metal with the spirit's consciousness in it. He would implant that in a corpse. At that point in time, the consciousness of that spirit would then command that cadaver and use that as its body. We would call that possession, right? And so this was just another way of reviving the dead and extending the existence of the deceased. And so that's why another thing is that it's impossible to understand the role of necromancy in the phenomenon of ufology until we understand the role of possession. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So possession, according to your Catholic exorcists, was always the relocation of a spirit. Now, if we get into their history, they got their demonology from Judaism purely. And there was a time in the 16th century when they kind of split. And so when your Kabbalistic exorcists believed these entities were dead people, Catholicism held a conference and said, we're going to say they're all devils. But what's most important here, guys, is that that the necromancy, the way these entities play a role in possession, is that possession is not about relocation of consciousness; it's about replication of the body. Is this interesting? I know we're getting deep already.
Definitely.
All right. So what would happen is we have these exorcists, even Catholicism, they would encounter an entity. The entity would step into a role. It would always, I'm Beelzebub. And they would go along with it. You're Beelzebub. Okay, we're going to treat you as Beelzebub. Not realizing that it's not Lord of the Flies, it's Lord of those who fly. He's talking about the little spirit, right? Very interesting stuff. But most importantly here, guys, I want to stress this, that the exorcistic rite is found in Numbers 19 and 11. It's nothing about horns and hooves. It was about corpse pollution and how that when someone is possessed by a ghost, they need to go through the ritual of exorcism. So first and foremost, I want to lay the foundation here. Possession is a form of necromancy, number one. And number two, in order to cleanse them of that necromancy, you have to perform the exorcism. So we're dealing with consciousness here, guys. Very interesting.
Definitely. And have you had cases where you've had to do exorcisms? I mean, what are some of the cases that you've come across that you've had to deal with personally?
Okay. Yes, I've done exorcisms, but I have not done the exorcistic rite of Catholicism. Do you guys remember how I told you that in the 16th century, you had two strands of demonology that were kind of separating themselves and kind of formulating their own theologies? One of them was your Kabbalistic exorcists in a province in Israel called Safdi. That's more so my tradition. So instead of just using holy water and just using scriptures, they actually believed the possessing entity itself was a disincarnate entity. And so what happened was people would be possessed by this entity, and like they would have different physical manifestations, different diseases. And so the way they would heal the person, the demoniac, was by healing the spirit in them. It's very interesting. So that's what's called the Kabbalistic rite. And so they treat possession as a form of the afterlife, and not just purely, we're going to stab you, devil, and get out of here and all that stuff. And I'm not disrespecting that. I'm just saying that I disagree with that slightly. But in my cases, I've encountered entities like that. Specifically, it was a young woman who had an attachment of suicide. And I'll just go ahead and tell you guys a story. I was at dinner one night, and a good friend of mine, Josh, pulled this girl next to me, her and her boyfriend. And I'm always reading. And I'm reading my book. And he's like, he goes, I know what you do, Nate. And he's like, and my friend here needs your help. And I said, okay. And she sits down and she starts talking. The first thing she says is that I need help. She said, because my best friend, a young girl, she said, her grandfather lives in this really haunted house, and she lives with her grandfather. She said that one night her grandfather was chased out of the house by this apparition, and she said that he was thrown on the ground in the front yard. He died. She inherited the house. She said, so she's like, now my best friend is afraid of staying in that house, obviously for reasons. And as she's talking to me, guys, I'm witnessing this cloud of darkness just descend down upon her. And I told her, I said, I do believe your friend needs help. And I do believe there's a grandfather here that we need to talk about. But I said, I'm more concerned about this attachment of suicide that I just saw land on you. When I said that, it was as if the atmosphere exploded, just like all of her pain. It was like all of the silent screaming had finally begun to trickle down her face. And she just began to shake, started crying. She said, absolutely. She said, I've been facing that for about a year or two now. I said, okay. She holds her hand out and she puts my fingers on scars where she had slit her wrists. So in that moment, I could have done two things. I could have cast the spirit of suicide out, right? Or I could have implemented the Kabbalistic rite, which was to talk to the spirit within that was attached. It's very important, very interesting. And so I said, okay, I said, this obviously to me, I felt it was familial. I said, so who in your family committed suicide? Remember how I told you there was a young girl and a grandfather involved, right? She said, my grandfather killed himself in 2014. I said, okay. So then I began to deal with the emotions, right? The heaviness, the insecurity, the fear, the depression. And so what I began to do was I began to give her freedom back to her. And I began to help her decide whose emotions belong to her and whose emotions belong to that entity. And so when I began to do that, you could feel, I mean, it was a powerful moment. But she actually put a testimony on my Instagram account. Once that event happened, you could feel a break, because that entity no longer had authority over her. So that was one of the ways that I implemented, not the Catholic rite. I didn't cast it out and then have it go and possess somebody else. I dealt with how, it's a different way of dealing with it. But in and of itself, it is a form of exorcism.
Yes. And here recently, Christina has a friend, Kim Wilkin, who passed away, and we're waiting to find out if it was suicide or a blood clot, because she had often, mentioned suicide. And here at this house, we've had one day where everyone here, myself included, had a weird thought, like something here was trying to say, like, kill yourself or whatever, something I would never do. But we had, like, every person in the house was having that thought, and it was just bizarre. And I was like, well, something's probably obviously, would love for us to do that. Of course, it can kiss my arse, but nonetheless, that's come up here, and it's definitely scary. And last night when we found out about Kim, we thought that's what she had done, but that they say it possibly could have been blood clots. So I'm hoping it was, it's bad either way, but I'd rather it be blood clots than, taking your own life. But as far as when it comes to, is that normally their a demon's first play that they enjoy to, get people to take their lives, obviously?
I believe that it's a very prevalent spirit. Let me attack that question. Not attack it, but let me answer that question and attack that spirit real quick. I faced suicide at 14 years old. When I was growing up in a haunted house, I had dreams of somebody committing suicide for months on end. I failed grade. I failed one grade, or I think it was a grade or two, because I couldn't get that heaviness off of me. So I think that's why I have a certain sensitivity and passion to help people who face that. But yes, now for those who are, because I know I don't know somebody's listening need to hear this. One thing to monitor is your thought life. What these entities will do is they will send a thought to you and then monitor your belief in the thought. Now there's a lot of, specifically trauma. If there's unhealed trauma or abuse that you've suffered that you've never, healed over and never got it out of your system, what will happen is they'll send an entity in the form of a thought to you, and then watch where you apply that thought to your life. For instance, let's say it's like a teenager or a young adult woman, and they were sexually abused in their youth. And so, and I've had this before, I've dealt with cases like this. What that entity will do is it'll stick them in abusive relationships to keep the pattern of behavior going, and then it will lay on them literally and figuratively, and then it will say things like, you're not worthy, you should just go ahead and end your life. And what happens is it'll send a thought, but it does not have permission to manifest yet. It's a thought now. But what it does is it will monitor where we apply that thought to us. And then when we apply it to us, when we say, you know what, I agree with that, I'm not good enough, I should go ahead and die, now that entity has authority. Now that entity is no longer just a thought. Now it's a full-blown being. Why? Because you've allowed it to exist by believing in what it says about you. And so that's why when I was dealing with that young lady, I had to help her understand to get rid of these thoughts, because once you start not believing them and start getting them out of your mind, I'm not in alignment with those thoughts, the entity no longer has authority. Vice versa, I've had a young man that was possessed by an entity, and the family wanted me to come out and do an exorcism on him. And I'm talking on my phone. I said, I don't do this for money. I said, I'm going to pay my own gas. It's about 2 hours away. But if and when I do show up, will you let me help you? He had agreed with the entity. So much so that he had made a covenant with him. And he literally told me over the phone, he said, well, I don't know that I want you here because every time it manifests in and of me, he said, it teaches me things about people I wouldn't know. So it goes both ways. If you believe it, it has authority over you. And that's the most expensive lesson I think I've learned dealing with suicide.
And then, of course, there's a lot of people that we know of that, and who are famous that have taken their lives that have kind of affected me. Many people, stuff like Kurt Cobain, Robin Williams, the guy Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. There's been so many, and you have to just sit back. What drives them to that? And it does seem like there's a force that definitely gets off on it, or whatever it does. I've definitely seen, people dealing with it on many levels. Me, as far as personally, I may have said it in my younger days, kind of foolishly or something like that. I know when I went through chemo and I had lost a testicle at 17, I took a gun and I put it to my head and was like, screw this. And I heard a Nirvana song, Lithium, and for some reason I couldn't do it. And that was one of my stunts, but that's the only time I had ever tried it, and that was just a rough time, for a teenager. But I know the Kurt Cobain thing affected me a lot, and I've always just kind of wondered from a spiritual standpoint, with what affects that, and I do think it's something dark for sure, something for sure.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, it's interesting you mentioned Kurt Cobain and all these other guys, man. My very first book is called A Moment Called Man. And I wrote that because, in a way, a very good friend of mine did commit suicide. And it wasn't, I don't know, I shouldn't say it like that, but he overdosed. But it was really wild. But my point here, and the reason I wrote the book, is because a lot of people who fight suicide, it's almost as if they're medicating a gift they're called to manifest. And it's impossible, especially as an empath, it's impossible to self-medicate someone else's pain. And so I wrote A Moment Called Man to assist people who are growing into their gifts and help them love themselves, even in the midst of fear, feeling misunderstood, and loneliness, not aloneness, but the loneliness that grips the hearts of people who are called to heal. There is a great deal of young people that were just like myself when I was 14, who are very much in tune with the spirit world. They'll go out to eat and they'll go home and cry, or they'll meet somebody and they'll instantly know things about them without them, the other person sharing. These are the people that I have found that are often addicted to drugs. They're in great depression. You'll see them. They're never one to have a great job, but they're awesome people. And what happens is, it's not that these people are worthless or that they don't have a purpose in life. What happens is, again, they're medicating and not manifesting. And so a lot of these people, when I start to talk to them, mentor them, and get them aligned in their gifting and what they're supposed to be doing in life, the pain is understood. I'm not saying it leaves. I'm saying that it's understood more, and now they can actually understand it and move into manifesting it more. But I want to shout out those people because I know they're going to be listening, even adults. 65-year-olds, 80-year-olds who've lived their entire lives, strangers to themselves. It's a very important thematic element here with respect to suicide and why people do that.
Definitely. And I know recently that Michael K. Williams, who I think he OD'd from heroin and passed away, really good actor. That was very sad. Lane Staley, Alice in Chains. I know in my case, I used to do worse drugs, but now they have weed here in Florida, and that's what I do. The only one I do, and I'm like, well, compared to what I used to do, that's pretty good. But my concern mostly is with vapes and stuff, because I do those. I need to try to curtail that for lung, because I know that's not good for your lungs, no matter which way you splice it. But I know a lot of my self-medication happened because I had those weird experiences. I know a lot of people go through this UFO stuff or weird stuff, and they self-medicate. And that's, definitely, I've run into many people with PTSD from experiences, and they self-medicate, and that's how they deal with it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, PTSD, I have a good friend of mine that has PTSD from the war, and he self-medicates too. It's very interesting because this is going to kind of go in a different direction. But you mentioned PTSD from these experiences. And to a degree, I suffered from that as well. Like in my youth, the entity itself would always manifest and literally move into my room at nighttime when I was alone. So to this day, like especially if I do an all-nighter researching, there's a part of me that doesn't like it to see me sleep. You know, and I think it's like almost an intuitive, instinctual reminder of what I went through in my past. But you know, in my research, I do believe that we're fighting the same entities. I do not for a second believe that these entities that are abducting people, you know, performing experiments and rituals and all this stuff, I don't believe these entities have our best interests in mind. I know too much about the literature, and I found their behavioral patterns as far back as 6th century BCE. First and foremost, our ancestors thought these beings to be soul hunters. So what that means, it comes out of the book of Ezekiel chapter 13. Yahweh, the God of the Bible, he says, those who hunt the souls of men to make them fly. Remember what I told you guys about the little spirit? How when somebody dies, it flies out, it's, you know, it leaves their body. Well, the bird imagery in Mesopotamia, the Phoenician texts, the bird represented that part of us that dies and leaves the body. And so that's why your demonology in Psalms 91, David's talking about the snare of the fowl, right? Why? That bird-like spirit that leaves the body, there are entities that will capture that portion of our existence. It's very interesting. Now, it's going to get very scary, but it's, you know, it's Halloween, so I anticipated people that would tune in just to get scared, hopefully. So Yahweh said that these entities were not so much interested in our bodies as much as they were interested in that apparitional existence that we possess, that little portion of us. We would call it an apparition. And so in Ezekiel 13, Yahweh calls them soul hunters. He describes a species of ghosts, necromancers, that would go into people's houses, into their homes. They would induce these individuals into a sleep state, and then they would pluck out that soul, right? And then they would begin to do things to the soul. It's very interesting. So when I read that text, I thought, wait a minute. So that's why I went to
hold on.
Oh, he's having an animal event.
It's okay.
Yes,
it wasn't me this time, so I'm good. I'm just kidding.
No, he's got lots of pets.
Yeah,
so, okay.
There's American bulldogs and a pig, and I got you.
Dude, them pigs
soul hunters.
So they would
pain in the ass.
soul.
Don't ever get one.
They would abduct the soul and that portion of us. See, that portion that the Atrahasis epic calls the flesh of a god, right? The soul is the flesh of a god. They would take that out of us, and they would treat our soul like we would treat our body. They would do things to it. They would take things out. A very interesting aspect here. But he also mentions, he says that they hunt the souls of men to make them fly. And so when you get into the imagery, the typology, the language of Yahweh in Ezekiel 13, he's literally pointing to a species of ghost, necromancers, who had the ability somehow to induce people into a sleep state, basically press pause on their body, and to pull the ghost out of them. Now, when I read that, I thought, man, that's very creepy, because it fits into the blueprint of what abduction truly is. Now, why do I say that? Because we have a major percentage of abductions where people are being pulled out of their body, and the entity, the part of themselves, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The part of themselves these entities are pulling is that astral, soulish, apparitional, lil part of our existence. Case in point, these are soul hunters, but case in point, Betty Luca was in bed one night. She's an experiencer. It's called the Betty. It's called the Andreasen affair for the researchers out there.
Yeah, Betty Andreasen. Yeah.
Yes, Betty Luca is in bed next to her husband. Her husband is awakened. So there's something in the room, something's going on. He leans over to witness these entities pull Betty out of herself. Wait a moment. Right? She said, I saw her body of light, like you mentioned, being peeled out of her body and then go through a wall. Now, Betty Luca remembered that event. They had pulled her into a dimension, whatever dimension they're in, they pulled her into it. And so now she's encountering these entities that are out of body, and she's out of body, and she's seeing, but her eyes are in bed, right? She's in two places at once. It's very important. Number one, this demonstrates an apocalyptic ability to keep the body alive with the soul out. Number two, they're educating Betty Luca. They're talking to Betty Luca in terms that are very descriptive. Number one, we're going to teach you how to fly a ship. Wait a minute. Not her body. They were teaching her soul how to fly a ship. Now, I want to suggest this. When they put her back into her body, she never flew a ship again. Why? Because I would suggest to the field that they're not educating the body's muscle memory, right? There's two memories here. They're educating her soul. Those who hunt the souls of men or women to make them fly. So what we're dealing with here is an apocalyptic species that has the evidential interest to peel us out of ourselves without our permission, and it's sometimes without our awareness. So that's where my research is centered, and this is getting instantly really dark, really quick.
That definitely wouldn't surprise me if something like that's happened to me. I've always thought maybe they were messing with me on the astral level or whatever, and I've had weird dreams, things like that. But let's say, I mean, they always put you back. Some of these entities, let's say they take it permanently. Does that leave you in like kind of a zombie state, or is there? And how would you get it back?
Okay, so this is very interesting. I just read this account tonight. It's from Beyond UFOs, and forgive, I have ADHD, and so when I do get to reading, I read like a monster. So this is already dog-eared and everything. But there's an account in here that I just read tonight where a young man was in almost a fatal car wreck, right? And he says that he's in this abduction experience. He said he leaves his body, and he says, I'm looking down at my body that's, like almost like shriveled up and on the road. And he says, next thing I know, this magnetic energy begins to pull. He said, in my soul, it pulls my soul. And he meets this old man who is a guide, which he's not really a guide. I don't believe that at all. The old man looks at him and says, this is very interesting, you could die here soon, and you will. Matter of fact, your doctors do not have the capability to put your body back together again. And guess what? If your body dies, you're displaced. You're going to die too. That's basically what they told him. And so they threatened them. They said, so here's your two options. Either you die, we allow you to die, or you do what we want you to do. You become our prophet, and we put your body back together again, and then put your soul back into your body. Now, I would suggest to you that these are the entities that orchestrated the motorcycle wreck. I would also suggest that throughout history, these entities have been plucking souls out of bodies, never to return them again. I would also suggest this plays a role in the missing 411 phenomenon, where people go missing and they're never seen again. But these are soul hunters. This is what they do. So in terms of people that are never returned, I think there are a lot of people that are dead that we would call out of their body. They're not in their body. Their body's dead, but they're captured by these soul hunters. Matter of fact, we have many abductees who encounter people they know died during the abduction. So again, I think we need to quit looking at abduction through the lens of, encounters of a third kind. Instead of it just being bodies and people that are missing bodily coming, I do believe there are dead people that we think are dead but are alive that are captured. Very, very unique. I know that's a unique standpoint, but there's an insurmountable amount, just a maelstrom of evidence here. So we're going to get to it, but
What book was that again that you had? The book.
This is Beyond UFOs. The science. Well, you have to put it all in there. It's a huge title. Just look it up. It's Beyond UFOs. This is volume 1.
Okay. I'm familiar with David. I've interviewed him many times, like 5 times or so, and I'm definitely that's Fisting Formula 1 is definitely some crazy situations that are just bizarre. So I'm definitely think there's something to what you're saying for sure about them taking that and stuff like that and working with the soul. And what do you think they do once they get it and they take it? I mean, do they keep it forever? Do they feed off of it? I mean, what do they do?
I think in a way they're using this as batteries. I'll tell you why. Because, like I told you about terraforming. Remember how I told you that they were merging consciousness with metal? That was the necromantic rite of preserving, life after death, was displacing themselves and putting themselves in metal. I do believe that's why a great deal of your abductees are saying these ships themselves are almost possessed, like they're conscious. See that connection? It's the same. It's the same phenomenon, the same technology throughout all of history. We just didn't know where to look. But let's get back to this aspect of hunting the soul. So Yahweh is another strange reference that your Jewish scholars will understand. It's fascinating. He says, those who hunt the souls of men to make them fly. And then he suggests what's called the currency of consciousness. He says, those who should live die. And those who are dying should live. What he's saying is that these entities are living by killing. Necromancers. And it's a very interesting phenomenon, and I don't even know where to go with that. But yeah, it's very interesting, and there's so many directions. But again, this behavioral pattern has been throughout all of history, but our ancestors interpreted these entities as ghosts. Period. It didn't matter if they had big eyes or no noses. These entities were apparitional according to them.
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff. It's real heavy.
Yeah, this is like a John Carpenter movie.
Yeah.
It's definitely a trip. But definitely in agreement with a lot of it. There's nothing I find myself disagreeing with. It seems like, truthful to me for sure. There's something to it, no doubt about it. And that's some of the things. We also had some experiences here where Christina saw a gray-like being standing over me at night, and it kind of said like it had kind of a mosquito kind of face. And at one point, I've had some weird experiences with the sun where I can close my eyes and let the white light fill me and say stuff like I am connected to the source. And I walked in this house after doing that, and when the grandmother was passing away, I saw a being in there that looked like a gray alien being, but it was like astrally, kind of like see-through, and it was almost like it peeked at me, like it was surprised I saw it, and somehow that sun gave me the vision to see it. So that's happened here, and I've never seen grays before. I've seen some little cloaked beings standing around a black box before that are very small with a witness and light beings, but never grays. But here, there's definitely, Michelle said, this Rocher said something about grays too, and the mother here. She has some situations she deals with older lady, and the gray things definitely come up. But is that, would you say those are hybrids? They're definitely the soul hunters too, though, on some level, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. These entities manifested to our ancestors, and our ancestors demonized them. So our ancestors put horns and hooves and said, okay, they're fallen angels. But again, like I said, in terms of definitions, what they're trying to say is these are ghosts. They're translucent. And so when you're dealing with the afterlife, you're going to deal with demonized consciousness. But let me say this. The first half of my research was essentially consisted of understanding the behavioral pattern of the incubus and the succubus throughout history. And when you get into these different texts, I mean, Genesis 6 and how they appear to women, and can I dive into that real quick?
Yes, please do.
That specific topic. Okay,
That's like a
because
spiritual spouse too, where you think you have something that they call a
Yes.
spiritual spouse or something like that. Yeah.
Correct. So I came to that text, Genesis 6, from an evangelical perspective, which is deeply empty, I should say. It's really, it wasn't good enough for me. It didn't make any sense to me at all, and so I had to dive deeper. But at Genesis 6, according to the King James Version, it says that in those days, giants were in the land, men of renown. When the sons of God saw the daughters of men and that they were fair, went in unto them and made unto them wives. And so it wasn't until I started to get my hands on other literature that other cultures were writing about this same phenomenon. And I want to suggest to the researchers out there, this is not the when angels fell. This is the how, because they're still doing it in the 21st century. It's a very important point. Point number 2, I got a hold of a Coptic manuscript called the Apocryphon of John. It was preserved by Egyptian monks, Christian monks. They said that, this is very interesting, they said that in that time of history, that incubi spirits, apparitions of men, were appearing to women. And it wasn't that they were actually marrying these women, but they were appearing to these women in the images of their husbands or a lover. You call that an incubus, right? And then it said that and it would coerce these women into copulating with them, an actual sexual relationship. But then it said something very interesting. It said that at the moment of impregnation, follow that rabbit hole for me, they would stare deeply into the eyes of the woman, still maintaining the apparition of the husband or the lover, and then they would inseminate them, and at the moment of insemination, they would reverse their appearance to what they actually looked like. What were they doing, right? What were they doing? So it was a lot, the phenomenon was a lot more detailed than what just King James wanted us to believe it was. Now, it also goes deeper. It says that the moment of impregnation, they change their apparition, they look into their eyes. Now, what they were performing, this is a rule these entities have. They were performing an ancient obstetric ritual. Whatever image the woman, that's what they believe, whatever image the woman saw, at the moment of impregnation, she would birth through her womb as a child. We would call it genetics, but they call it something different. Now, what we have here, again, we have an apparition that's trying to father its own child. Why? Because it does not have a body. It doesn't have a body. So what it's doing is it's creating a child that will grow up to look like its apparition. Very important. So what you have, I can see it's very deep. But what now we have here is what's called in demonology and possession, we call it the social skin. Now we have the spirit, the software, and the body, the hardware. And then death was begotten through the womb of the woman. And that's why in Genesis 6 we call them Rephaim, giants. But there's a dual meaning here, ghosts. Very interesting. And so these entities created a hybrid. Why? They stepped into them. And they were born into this dimension, reborn by being reborn through the womb. The whole idea here is it's almost an illegal form of reincarnation. So that idea of being an incubus to impregnate and a succubus to extract the biological essence. Those are two roles that ancient demonologists understood. They understood what was happening, but they thought they understood why. But it wasn't until we get into the 21st century and we start realizing, okay, these entities are doing the same thing. Now they can look like grays, they can look like grandma. Like I worked with a young lady in India. This entity has manifested to her 8 times in the image of every lover she's been with. It's the same entity, right? It's just looking for a way to do what they've always done, which is impregnate. I know it's heavy, man. It's heavy stuff.
Definitely a trip for sure, no doubt about it. And is that what jinn are? Is that similar to those beings? Jinn, the jinn.
So yeah. So your jinnah, because I'll tell you what, man. I had an Arabic linguist basically verbally accost me for that. It was kind of funny. Jinn. He's like, no, it's jinnah. I'm like, oh, well, I call him jinn. So whatever. Yeah. So what happened was, your Islamic demonology, it originated from your Jewish demonology. But even in Jewish demonology, the Hebrews call these entities shadim, seidu. That's the Akkadian loan word. So they didn't even originate, in Hebrew theology. That came from the Akkadians. But your jinn it's the same entities. They're describing the afterlife. What happened was they were encountering in their exorcisms entities that thought they were married. Hello, ghost. That thought they had kids. Hello, ghost. Right? That entities that were literally possessing people. It's very unique. And they weren't performing the exorcistic rite and just throwing holy water. They were actually having conversations with these entities. Excuse me. And so I want to prop up my answer with this. During the same time these Islamic exorcists were dealing with entities, next door in Safdi, you had Kabbalistic exorcists who were dealing with entities. And what happened oftentimes is you would have I forget what it is. Anyway, you would have an Islamic guy. He would be talking to this entity. The entity happened to be Jewish, and so he would actually tell him, "I don't believe in Allah. I believe in Yahweh." And so he would go to the neighboring village and say, "Hey, listen, is there an exorcist here?" Yes. So then they would have to conform the religion to the spirit. It's very interesting. But in all of it, again, even jinn and the nature of jinnah, it points right back to entities who have the memory they inherited and that are disincarnate. I hope I'm not too ADHD tonight, guys.
And when it comes to, I guess the biggest thing is it's like, obviously God is there, but
yep.
This is a philosophical question, but it just seems like life's hard enough with, every bill you have to pay and surviving, and you got to, worry about all these invisible a-holes everywhere. Where does God fit into all this? Does he try to stop it? Obviously there's ways to pray and get close to Christ. I guess that protects you. I'm just trying, I guess that's the philosophical question. What the hell?
Well, let me say this, man. Those who know me and are close to me know that when I research, I go hard, and I try to, look at the phenomenon in every way I can. I took a break from researching for a week or two, and I went to Rhode Island. I stayed on Federal Hill, and I just unplugged because, I had read a case where it was a Christian lady, and she felt the abduction coming on, and she began to quote the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth," and all of a sudden her head leans back and her eyes roll back in her head. Put the imagery there. Can you imagine? Our Father who art in heaven. So whatever we're dealing with, again, there's either God is allowing this to happen, or we need to reconsider some very painful things, because we have abductees that are calling on Jesus, and sometimes it works. We have a greater amount of abductees who are calling on Jesus, and they'll manifest as Jesus. And I would also say this: they become our thoughts. In other words, they weaponize our beliefs against us. So like one case is Dr. Carla Turner's case, where the lady was Christian. She said, she called on Jesus, and they said, okay, we have Jesus too. From the shadows emerges Jesus, but it wasn't the Jewish rabbi Jesus, right? In the first century, olive skin, all that stuff. No, this was the white Presbyterian Jesus, right? That she believed.
Yeah.
So they plucked her belief out, weaponized it against her, and said, "Oh, you mean this?" So either I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I've heard of Carla Turner, and I know there was one case where a lady had, I guess, a deceased loved one appear to her. It was reptilian or something like that. I remember that particular story from Carla Turner and the controversy around her death and things like that.
Correct. Dr. Carla Turner is a huge huge component to my research. I think she's one of the greatest researchers ever lived. She was incredible. But even in her research, man, she had one lady. One lady was abducted, and again, they threatened her with death. They had actually pulled her out of herself. And what's interesting is a lot of these abductees, they'll look at their body, and to them, in their perception, they're still in their body. And it's wild to see their psychology as it evolves to realize this is not my physical body. As a matter of fact, Dr. Turner had an individual who experienced that very same event. She's thinking she's in her body, and the entity looked at her and said, if you do not comply to our demands, you see that corpse over there on the table, and it was her. She didn't realize she was out of her body. And they said, if you don't, do what we want you to do, we will replace you. And then we'll send the body and send someone in your body back to Earth or wherever, and nobody will know the difference. So do I believe there are people that didn't comply with them that it happened to? Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. And I think, again, that is a new form of abduction that researchers need to consider. If they have the ability to put us in the two, then they're not just capturing the body. I think they're also capturing the soul.
And I know I saw here on your bio, what is preternatural? I know I just said that wrong. Preternatural phenomenal philosophy.
Okay, that's when I got into this field. I started realizing that a lot of researchers were getting enchanted with the side effects of the phenomenon. And what do I mean by that? Like in ancient demonology, our ancestors would often give descriptions to demons, right? Descriptions. It's a lot like abductees. They like a lot of abductees were called beings. The tall blonde. And if you put that in antiquity, we would call those tall blonde demons. We would, demons are tall blondes. No, those are descriptions, right? But they're not definitions. And so what I had to do early in my research is separate our ancestors in terms of what they described these entities to be and what they actually were. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of researchers get caught up in that, especially evangelical researchers. They don't outgrow the dogmatism they grew up in, and it's very damning. And that's really why I've stepped away from a lot of their theories, because it's too entrenched in one period of time. They have to go wider and higher.
And I recall I had mentioned my experience earlier when I had seen 3 small cloaked beings in the woods with a friend, and they had a small black box. And I saw a friend, Brian, saw them as well. This was in my early 20s, but a cat jumped towards them, a black cat, and they vanished. But I will never forget those 3 small beings in that black box. So they use some kind of technology to do this? Is that what does that ever come up, like the black box?
We would call it.
Obviously,
yeah. Yes, that matter of fact, it's kind of funny. I was talking to Michelle DeVries. If you haven't heard of her, guys, she's unbelievable. She's unbelievable. She has some interviews on YouTube. She's somebody that I just have higher respect for. But she mentioned this to me one time, and I started researching. Yeah, it's Dr. Carla Turner mentions that black box, and it was in the context of someone's soul being trapped in the black box, literally where an abductee was watching them pull souls out of bodies and place them in a box. Now, to answer your question, we don't know if it is some form of technology or, we can't define it. What kind of technology could pull a soul out? We don't have that. We don't even have the physics we need to measure that kind of technology. But I don't know. It's necromancy technology. I know a lot of people think it is, but it's a tough question. So I don't really know if it is technology at this point.
Well, it's that box has always creeped me out because trying to figure out what the hell it is. So that definitely adds a new component to it. That's even more creepier. So,
and I hate to be that guy, man. Honestly, on my shows, a lot of people, they think I'm just going to be the usual talk about demonology, horns and hooves and all that stuff. And it's like, the reason we are scared of the devil, many of us are scared of the devil, is because we at least know how to quantify it. We know how to qualify it. We know which, dimension to put it in. We never really thought about an entity that can pull us out of ourselves. Like one instance that's really concerning is Betty Luca. During one abduction, she was in a ship and they're talking to her soul. They're educating her soul. And they're telling her that when we're done, you will not remember this. Then why are you telling me? Right? Again, they're not telling the body, they're telling the soul. So anyway, she's in this ship and she looks around and she sees three humans laying like cadavers, laying on these tables, and there were three balls of light or orbs, one over each of them. What were they doing? They had pulled the soul out. It's a horrifying thought that we're dealing with a species that's doing that, because we can't stop it. And I think our government knows that. We can't stop it.
How do you spell Michelle's last name? I was trying to find it just to save it for later, but what is it? Debris?
DEV. She's like one of my great friends. Let me pull her up. I don't want to mess her last name up. Michelle. Yeah. DEV RIEZE.
Okay.
She used to be a big time exec. Left everything to do this work, and she's brilliant. Yeah. So all right. So we have a little bit of time. So let's get into exactly how this soul and body and all this stuff works. So about a year and a half ago, I did a show and I was discussing scarifications. One of the behavioral patterns that I saw researching the incubus was that these entities were accosting women and then afterwards carving symbols onto their bodies. Now, the very first demonologist to encounter this phenomenon was Father Sinistrari of Amino. He was a Franciscan priest. He was very interesting. He was one of the demonologists that would go to a house within an hour of this entity accosting the woman. They would actually collect biological excretions from the entity. Why? Right? They're trying to inseminate. It's the same thing over and over again. It's the incubus. Anyways, he had a victim who she later on died in life, but it wasn't from her assault or anything. It was just, I think it was old age. But he, along with a couple other doctors, were doing an autopsy. It was very unique, okay? And they peeled back her eyelids, and they saw that the entity that had accosted her throughout her lifetime had carved his symbols or his language underneath her eyelids. So that's a thing. It's a very disturbing aspect of the phenomenon, but it exists. So one night I was on a show talking about that, how these entities will possess people, and in the possession there are things that will manifest on the skin. This man reached out to me and he said, he's like, I've never heard of that until I heard your research. He said, but I want to talk to you about my father. He said, my father was a renowned remote viewer in my local town. He said the local celebrities would often pay him thousands of dollars to get readings. He would essentially lay on bed, his father would lay on his bed, his soul would separate from his body, and he would encounter these entities. He said it was interesting. He said, because one night, he said, my father went to do a reading for a group of people. He said about 20 minutes into it, he said, I hear my dad scream. He stumbles down the stairs, his dad does. He's incoherent, inconsolable. He's shaking. He's white. He's crying. And he said, we saw these entities manifest scarification symbols on his chest simultaneously. And he said when he got to the hospital, they calmed his dad down. His dad looks at his chest and says, look what they did to me. Now, what happened to his father, he said that he encountered these guides. And when he realized that these weren't his guides anymore, they changed their apparition and they took his soul and placed it back into his body. Now, my point here is that when his soul got back into his body began to manifest these symbols, right? Soul first, body second. Okay, let's go to the second time I've researched that. This is also a phenomenon that Betty Luca has encountered. Do you remember the night when I said that Bob Luca witnessed his wife's soul being peeled out of her body? Betty Luca was put back into her body, and Bob Luca witnessed simultaneous scarifications occur on her skin. Soul first, body second. Okay? Even if you get into Ian Stevenson's work, when you're dealing with reincarnation, or what we would call that, when you have 8-year-olds who are Indian but they're speaking fluent Japanese, and Ian Stevenson would talk to these children, and they would often have death wounds. They would actually have a story about that death wound. They would say that in another life, I died. And what happened to the soul, right, manifested on the body they're possessing. First the soul, then the body. And so what I'm saying is, again, we need to be looking at not just the physical nature of this phenomenon, but how that they are manipulating the soul and then placing it back in the body. So we're not just dealing with nuts and bolts and physicality and how they're doing punch biopsies of Bud Hopkins stuff. I believe that. But we also need to consider the fact that they're manipulating the soul and it's manifesting in and on the body as well.
And I know when it comes to, it's a lot to take in, I know, but when it comes to these beings and everything, I know we have Halloween coming up. Do you think that's a time when they're more active? The veils are lower and things like that?
I think that they would be more active. I mean, I don't think so at all. And I hate to say that. I know people do it. I'm sure they're great people and everything, but these entities are operating around their own clock. Now, if they want to play the role of that, they will. They'll play, okay, I'll be a ghosty, I'll be and all that stuff. That's fine. But they'll also manifest as Dear Aunt Edna, right? So again, they work around their own schedule. Even in the incubi case, I was telling somebody about this the other day. Even in my incubi cases, a lot of these entities will have their own schedule. Literally, it's like they'll assault in the month of October. They'll come back around, and in that very same time period, they're back again. So do they belong to our time frame? If they do, it's because they want to. It's not because they're trying to honor us or anything.
Have you found that you get, when you start getting onto them more or figuring them out more, that you kind of get on their list, or then they come after you? Is there things you have to do to protect yourself?
Okay, so when I really started diving in deep, I was doing shows where EVPs started coming through. Matter of fact, I did Dark Horse Paranormal, Rhode Island. We did a show not too long ago, and in the show, you could actually hear them cussing me out. You blah, 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 blah. But it was after that show that Kristen Johnson was looking at the recording. She had her headphones on. And prior to the show starting, she said it wasn't an EVP. It was more so a transmission. These entities were talking to each other. One said to the other, wait until they go alive or whatever, and wait until they can hear us. And then they started doing EVPs. But Kristen described these entities like this. And this is what I found to be true. When she heard their voices come over her headphones, they projected their nature. They projected their consciousness into the headphones. Kristen, she said, the amount of evil that I felt was something she had never encountered in a haunted house, never encountered in the haunting she grew up in. She said it was something so other. She said, I threw the headphones and I ran out of my house. It terrified her. That's the true nature of these entities. So yes, they knew who I am, and the only way I've learned this far to kind of separate myself is to watch stupid cartoons. That's how I do it, or that's really I watch Frasier. I've learned that in order to get away from that sticky feeling, that heavy feeling, that's what helps me the most. That's not a prescription, by the way. To each their own.
What kind of stupid cartoons?
Oh man, so I leave Frasier on most of the day. It's like therapy. Frasier. I'll watch Bob's Burgers, Family Guy, because I love Rhode Island, and unless you've been to Rhode Island, Family Guy won't make as much sense. But you know what I mean, like a bar in every corner. It's just so that's what I do. But make no mistake, man, there are times, and those who are closest to me know, where I just have to shut down and walk away, because there have been times when I felt them looking into me. It's a really weird feeling. It's different than hauntings. Like I've had a murder case where, I do a cleansing and they just cut up the carpet a week before. But it was nothing like that. It was nothing like that.
Anything you'd like to add, Wham? I know you're familiar with Carla Turner a lot too, as well.
Yeah, from a different perspective. Some of what you were talking about reminds me of a couple of things that I've experienced. There was one really interesting experience that I had. It was some years ago. It was probably maybe 25 years ago, when I was deeply involved in studying Judaism. I had become interested in mystical Kabbalah and actually got to the point of conversion. And there was a woman that I had become friends with, and she had her parents had been Holocaust survivors.
Okay.
And so, that experience had obviously messed them up a great deal.
Yeah.
And despite and I don't know, it was never entirely clear to me how religious her immediate parents were, but other members of her family that had not been in Europe, that had been in the United States, had been Orthodox, and so she had been exposed to Orthodoxy. But because her parents were so screwed up, her mother horribly abused her as a result of her trauma, both physically and sexually, actually. And so she had strayed from her religion, her culture. But when I met her, I guess it was because I was so fascinated with the tradition and so into it, that she sort of got attached to me in some ways. And we did Passover together and Yom Kippur together, and we did a whole, I guess I inspired her to sort of reconsider or re-enter the tradition. But anyway, she would often talk about how her mother had passed, and she would often talk about how she felt like her mother sort of possessed her in a certain way.
Yes.
And would often in her life, she felt like it was like her mother compelled her to do really self-destructive things. Well, anyway, as a part of my friendship with her, at a certain point, I gave her a prayer shawl that I had purchased for myself, just sort of as a gift, just sort of, and that the night that I did that, the night after I did that, I had a very strange experience, which I now understand was some kind of a liberating experience. I had a dream. It was I had a dream that was very complex. I'm not going to go all into it, but it involved the central part of it was that there was this the rabbi of the synagogue to which we were both attending was in the dream, and then all of a sudden in the dream the rabbi turned somehow into her mother and began pursuing me in the dream, like around the office, and like, but I was easily able to keep away, right. But it chased me like all the way. Like I got in my car and it chased me. It was just this long pursuit. And eventually I got to what I understood was my house, or the place where I lived. And it turned out to be this huge ziggurat-like structure. It was like amazing, but it was like, it had all of these elaborate, I kind of recognized like what the model of it was, but it had all of these doors and gates and everything. Well, I got in, I was fine, and when it realized, and whatever this entity was, her mother, whatever, it kept trying to get in. It was like it was battering itself against the walls of whatever this was. Yeah. So at some point in that, I just woke up and sat straight up out of bed. I mean, just literally just sat straight up in bed. And this is the only time anything like this has happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
There was a figure at the foot of my bed. It was a white skeletal figure.
Yeah.
And I saw it. It saw me, and it took off running. And I was, without even thinking about it, I was out of the bed and chasing it. And I chased it down. I chased it out of the bedroom, down the hall, into the living room, where I flipped on a light. And I couldn't see anything, but I could tell that there was like this, I can't even describe it. There was like this feeling in the room. I was wide awake. This feeling in the room that was kind of like, just kind of like
frequency
heavy.
Almost.
Yeah, it was like a vibratory thing. And I could tell that whatever it was, I couldn't see it, but it was like in the corner, like in the far corner. And the only thing I could think of to do was I had an Orthodox prayer book with me, the Siddur, and in Orthodox Siddurs, there's this wonderful ritual, which I've shared with you, Jeffrey, on the amelioration of bad dreams. And it's a great ritual. And so I just sat there and I read it, the ritual, both in English and Hebrew, 3 times. Just read it. Didn't meditate, just read it. And when I got to when I got through the 3rd time, there was this audible pop, just boom, just like that, and it was gone.
I believe that.
And what was interesting was that, like, several days later, she contacted me and told me that same night she had a dream about her mother, and that she didn't share with me all the details about it because it was very personal, but that she felt as if her mother had been driven from her and that she felt free. And she went on to go and do all kinds of interesting things after that. It was kind of like she went back to her tradition. She's fairly observant.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say she's Orthodox, but she's
kind of reformed almost, at least. Or?
Yeah, well, more conservative. So it was just like, well, that was interesting. Somehow I did something right. But what is interesting to me is that I just had no fear of it whatsoever, or whatever it was. I mean, I've had a number of different experiences where I've been out of my bodies with other entities. I don't think that every time you're out of your body with other entities that they're trying to steal your soul, because these entities were not. We were just out there flying around, but I certainly have had entities like come into my house, and I have this deal with them that which is sort of a standing deal, that if you can't come to me when I'm awake, don't pester me in my sleep, because that will just piss me off. That will piss me off, because it does. Because I've awakened many times to things like in my room, and I tell them to leave. It's get out, get out. And I don't know, they leave when I tell them to get out. So it's like, whatever. But, a lot of what you've been talking about has made a lot of sense in terms of there are parallels that I know of in like Northern European tradition, and certainly in indigenous tradition here in the United States that I've studied, that I've under teachers. So, I mean, some of the terms are different.
Right. Same ideas, though, right?
Well, basic ideas. I mean, I would say that. Yeah, I would say basic ideas. I mean, there's some debate in those traditions about whether souls can actually be stolen, or whether that's a conceit that certain powers want to convince you that they can do. So there's some issue about surrounding that. I mean, I think that I do think that there's a lot of BS that goes on with certain entities. They want to tell you that they're more powerful than they are.
Yeah, they're going to gaslight us and all that. I believe that.
Yeah, and so there's a sense in which I guess I'm not gaslighted very well. It's like, my response to that is, yeah, you and whose army,
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that if you're kind of crabby about it like that's sort of an interesting defense. I do think they feed on fear. I think that if you're afraid or if you're tentative, a lot of people have mixed intentions about this stuff. They're scared of it, but they're also fascinated with it.
Mm-hmm.
They're scared of it, but they're also fascinated with the power and with the mystery. And you have to sort of be careful that way, because that sometimes if you don't take care with that, it leaves your boundaries really permeable, and they'll some of them will take advantage of that. It's like, oh well, they don't really know what they're doing, so
they'll make a point, right?
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, but when, as you were talking, I was really thinking about that experience with my friend, because that was like one of the most vivid experiences I've ever had of an entity like that. I mean, completely awake, just and actually seeing something like that had sort of a semi-corporeal form at a moment, and was clearly linked, I think, to her mother as an ancestor. And I think that probably it was, I don't know, I don't know if it was her mother really, or if it was whatever had possessed her mother that somehow passed to her.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Because I'm dealing with this with a student of mine right now. I'm a Sufi, and I'm dealing with this with a murid of mine who has had a number of traumatic experiences in her life, and she has some kind of an attachment on her, and it isn't really clear actually whether it's a growth of her own, something that invaded that. I mean, I almost sort of think that it was something that invaded that in order for her to cope with it. She sort of created, like, I guess the best way to put it is like a spiritual callus, around it.
Yeah.
And it's not even so much that it's something else anymore as it is just her own stuff that she has to figure out how to reintegrate. And we're still sort of working with that, but it seems to be better than it was. But I think these kinds of things are interesting. I think the working assumption that we are dealing with multiple levels and states of consciousness and types of consciousness, that surround us at all times. I think that's sort of and that a lot of these are our ancestral beings in one way.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That not to interrupt you, you're reminding me, because I'm huge into the Jewish tradition. Like, my dad is he's Hebrew roots, and so so that's what I know a lot about it. I grew up in that pretty much once we left evangelicalism. What's fascinating to me is the legend of the Dibuk or the Dybbuk.
Yeah,
and a lot of people are limited to it's just a wine box, and when you get into the linguistics, it's possession. Even the pictorial tradition was somebody walking with a skeleton attached to them.
Right, exactly.
Incredible stuff, So again, this doesn't point to horns and hooves as much as it points to consciousness, right? It's the dead person, or there's an attachment that's laying on and laying in. It's very unique. But one thing that's fascinating too, and we're dealing with how they interpret pregnancy. They interpret pregnancy as a form of possession, and possession as a form of pregnancy. That's why in the 16th century we had, again, the incubus phenomenon in another name. They called it Dybbuk. We had women that were being induced into sleep states and being accosted in a dream by an entity. Same thing in Genesis 6. And I want to make a side point here, guys. If that's specifically when they fell, was in Genesis 6, and not how they fell, then I guess angels are still falling. No, right? So my foot has to think bigger in terms of that area of history. Anyway, so In the 16th century, we had women that were being accosted by entities, waking up from the dream and having bruises and scars. And not just that, but they began being possessed by the entity they encountered in a dream. Very unique, very unique. And then, okay, so not only was that occurring, but these entities begin to evolve. They begin to mutate into a very strange strain of evil. These entities were not just possessing them, but these women were going to the Kabbalistic exorcists of the day. It's Isaac Luria, Naomi Vital, and they're talking to these individuals, and they're manifesting this crazy, and they're showing up possessed by the entity, and the entity itself is in the fetal position in their womb, which calls these Kabbalistic exorcists to ask the following profound question. Is possession pregnancy? Number one. And number two, were these individuals possessed by or pregnant with the entity? I would suggest that in order to answer that question, we have to go back to Genesis 6. One the same. So they perceive pregnancy as a form of possession and possession as a form of pregnancy. Now, I don't know how much time we have. We have like 10 more minutes to get down to the nature of possession and all that. We good? 5 more minutes?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, we're good.
So possession was never about the relocation of consciousness. So when we get into Ezekiel 13, we start to understand that these entities are trying to create a body. This is very interesting. It's called a social skin. So when you get into linguistics in Hebrew in Ezekiel 13, they were cutting pieces of flesh off to sew it onto themselves. It redacts back to the ancient skin grafting that your physicians did. It's very interesting. That's what it's a form that they were performing. But they were trying to create this body that looked like their spirit, their apparition. So it wasn't until I started getting into anthropology, and I got a hold of James Frazier's book, The Golden Bow, that he starts to describe where this phenomenon of dispossessing your body and placing your soul into someone else. It originated in ancient warriors. This is very interesting. When they were dying, when they were on the battlefield, they knew their body had suffered a mortal wound. They would dispossess their own body. This is why the New Testament said the angels left their first estate. They dispossessed their own body and placed their soul in someone else. Now, my point here is that possession was never just about the relocation of consciousness, but the replication of the body. Give me something that looks like me. That way it's not transient possession. It is something that is mine and it's centered. Matter of fact, Malachi Martin, the great Catholic exorcist, would call this perfect possession, where death can look at you through the eyes. And that's all I got to say about that. But it's fascinating stuff. But certainly, I think the field of demonology, especially in the Catholic tradition, we have to stretch ourselves beyond the dogmatist. It has to grow.
Yep.
And we got till 5 till, so that's when we end the show. 5 till.
Okay. So I didn't know. Yeah, and all of this plays a role in the UFO abduction phenomenon. Matter of fact, I will suggest that there's a reason why Yahweh said, "Thou shalt make no graven image of me," because we do not have these entities manifesting as Yahweh. Very interesting. It's interesting to me because they'll manifest as Jesus because we have people who some of them have politicized Jesus, and they have different images of Jesus, so we have something for them to pull from. We have a role in which they can step into. But all of this plays, again, necromancy. There's nothing these entities are doing that doesn't already occur in history as a form of necromancy. I didn't know if we had any questions, which,
I know with necromancy, most people think it's like a wizard bringing a dead person back to life, like, Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, but you've definitely added many new layers to it, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Like what's so interesting about this is when you're what is her name? Because I see Wham on here. What is her name?
It's Wham. That's a radio name.
Wham. Okay. Cool. So Wham, you were mentioning this frequency you were feeling. Now in the Old Testament, the Ammonites called this frequency Zamzu meme. Zamzu meme. Now, that's what these Ammonites, when they went into Canaan, they experienced these entities, and they called them Zamzu meme. So obviously, meme being plural, so Zamzu is singular, right? And so your Zamzu, this is interesting. The reason they named these entities Zamzu was not because it was a concrete title, but it was in their language. The only word they had that sounded like the language these entities communicated in. A buzzing, chirping, a whispering language. Now, also as a reference, Isaiah 8:19, Yahweh comes against necromancers. He describes this language. He said, those who consult the necromancers, those who chirp, and those who mutter. Now, again, if we're going to deal with chirping, again, we're dealing not with actual chirping, we're dealing with imagery here, right? The chirping soul. It's a person that's possessed by that lil spirit, and it begins to speak through. So what are we dealing with? Again, we're dealing with a string of necromancers. And I'll shut up, man. It's so deep, and it's cool because, I don't really, when I do shows, there's not a lot of people that are that, I would say, knowledgeable about orthodoxy and all that stuff. And it's really cool to, talk about that with you because you understand a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
But and the UFO phenomenon. When did you decide to tie that into everything? Did that take a while to come to that conclusion with UFOs?
Not really. Honestly, it didn't, because in Ezekiel, Ezekiel's wheel. Again, I don't really agree with a lot of these evangelical interpretation of that. The Bible says that the spirit, this is interesting. The spirit of the creature was in the wheel. Again, we need to start looking at two different Hebrew words, neshama and nefesh. Those two Hebrew words will unlock the door of understanding for a lot of these evangelical research. The stuff. And I will say this. Until we understand nefesh and neshama and how it's employed in these texts, we will never understand how and why they were merging their consciousness with metal. And wherever the creature went, wherever the wheel went as well. Again, it's everywhere, but I think that there are greater dimensions of thought to learn once we place the phenomenon in the correct historical context. When you do, it opens up and you start to see things that have always been there.
Actually, I agree with you. One of the interesting things when I was deeply studying Kabbalah, and this is Jewish Kabbalah, not Hermetic Kabbalah.
Life is Levi.
Yeah. I found it really interesting that there are like 5, depending on the authority, there are about like 5 or 6 different levels of soul. And one of those levels of soul is a kind of collective, it's it's the part of you that comes from the ancestors that hooks you to them. And there is a lot of interplay between nefesh and neshama, as you say, because it's in between those two kinds of souls or levels of souls that physical manifestation occurs. That's sort of the nexus that provides the mechanism, if you will, for physical manifestation. And it was interesting to me because, we tend to think of soul as being, we in the West, we've inherited, a Greek idea of the soul, that the soul is sort of this, one thing. But the Semitic and Jewish and Arabic and Egyptian ideas of soul are much more complex, and I think really much more subtle. I think that they provide a lot more useful information for understanding sort of the levels of consciousness that you're talking about. But I bet, like you say, a lot of people really don't pay that much attention. And you have to learn, you have to study the other languages, and I think that's part of it. It's like nobody wants to study Hebrew. It's like, oh, please, it's like one of the major religious languages of the world. I mean,
You're right. It's fascinating to me, and it took a lot of me to grow out of the Christian tradition. I still get people that, and I'll just be honest with you, they're impressed with the research, but they're too afraid to let go. You know what I mean? Of that, oh my God, it has to be like this, and my pastor told me it has to be like that, and therefore, if I don't agree with my pastor, he's going to put me in a big old pot of stew, and he's going to burn me for as long as God lives. And it's like, look, guys, they didn't write the Bible. We have authors, right? And I did a show the other day, and they were asking me a lot of these questions. I said, guys, in order to understand what these people wrote, we have to understand what they read, right? And it sounds simple, but there are a lot of people that don't. And so when they're making references like the transfigured soul, and it goes back to Egyptology and how there's different different levels of soul, all that stuff, and if they don't know that, it's a lot of times it's difficult to teach, because it's like, I can't get you here, right, until I get you over here, and it takes me an hour to get you over here. It can be frustrating, and so in recent history, in recent past, I've been trying to simplify it, which it's difficult. You know what I mean? It's a lot of these thoughts are so expansive. It's like,
the truth is that I mean, the way I've come to think of each one of us is sort of like a combo of things, and it's not simple in that you can't just point to it and say, or whatever. But it's simpler for me because it actually takes account of the data. I mean, for me, something is simpler if it accords with data. Then it's simpler. It isn't simpler because it's just a less facile. I mean, it's a more facile concept. I don't know. That was part of the reason why I had to leave Christianity too. I mean, the circumambulations that my mother wanted me to make around the version of the Trinity that I was taught.
Yeah.
It was just like, especially once I found out that it came down to, between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, it came down to simply a disagreement about where a piece of grammar was.
Yep.
In terms of how they were going to interpret, how the Trinity was structured, and then it was just a matter of a scribal error.
Yep.
It was like, okay, so all of this stuff is just kind of
entire movements.
Somebody screwed up. Some scribe was not clear about where he put an iota. And so you have the Western Church going one way with its theological understanding of the Nicene Creed, and the Eastern Church going its way. And I just thought, you know what? I'm too tired for this.
It's so funny.
I am not going to. These are pointless theological posturings at this point.
Yeah. It reminds me of, I think it was the School of Hillel. It was either him or Gamaliel, right? But I think it was Hillel. They argued for a decade on literally whether or not it was good for God to have made man. And for a decade, I mean, every day, like today, we're going to argue about this subject. It's like, dude, but this stuff has to be discussed. And I think, again, that the data, it suggests a lot more than a lot of researchers want to accept. I mean, I know researchers that are actually doctoring their data, literally. Like people have come to me and said, okay, I went to this author and I told him, you're asking for abduction accounts. Here's my abduction account. Well, that's too negative. Block. We don't want to hear from you. So they begin to shape their own narrative, and I have to ask myself, who's wanting you to do that?
In my master's thesis, I talk about that. Okay.
And we can't do that. That's so damning. I
Well,
mean, I can't.
it completely destroys the whole concept of how it is that I mean, it completely destroys the whole concept of research. I mean, why do that? It's just crazy.
It's like taking things out of a word and just going with that.
Yeah.
What are you up to, Nathaniel, on Halloween?
I don't know, man. My Buckeyes play tomorrow, so I'm getting geared up for a big Buckeye game in college football. That's about it. Nothing deep there, dude. I'm probably going to get my PJs and either watch Frasier or watch, I don't know, football or something. What about you guys?
I know I'm doing the Halloween gig for the network at 9, so mostly I've been listening to a lot of weird music, like old Halloween music and stuff like that. They have so many weird playlists for parties for Halloween on YouTube. That stuff gets pretty crazy. There's some good stuff in there. Listen to Ministry earlier. Every day's Halloween, and you know, if you put in Halloween music on YouTube, there's our Halloween vintage music. A lot of old weird stuff, like from the 30s and 60s or whatever, just old weird Halloween music. That's a lot of fun. There's a channel on our cable that's Sounds of the Seasons, and they've just been playing like Elvira singing and weird stuff like that. So the music helps for sure. We don't get trick-or-treaters here, or I don't even know if they come anywhere around here in this town. I've never seen them in any of the towns around here. A lot of them go to churches and do some trunk or treat or whatever that is. But there's like no trick-or-treaters here. It's like a lost, like extinct, I guess, here in Florida, Bible Belt. So doesn't happen anymore.
That might help a lot, you know?
Yeah, it does. They try. It's Sunday, so they do weird stuff. Like a long time ago, they used to try to change the date for some reason. Like I guess that would give it less power or something. Like put it on Halloween on a different date instead of the date it's on. Weird stuff like that. Yeah. Definitely gonna do Halloween Kills. So that's about it. I like to try to watch some horror movies and stuff like that. But do you have a website you'd like to plug? We got about 4 minutes.
I had a website, but honestly I'm on social media anyway, and I know that people want me to have a website. I used to. I'm on social media, the Nathaniel Gillis on Facebook and Instagram. On Instagram, I'm not one of those guys, you know, that, and nothing wrong with this, but I'm not always posting what I eat and all that stuff. I put, you know, everything I put on Instagram is about my research. If I'm in, you know, if I'm deep into some behavioral pattern or some connection I put all of my thoughts on Instagram. So out of the two, Facebook and Instagram, I would follow Instagram, the Nathaniel Gillis.
All right. Well, it's definitely been a pleasure having you here for the Halloween show, and definitely some great truths in there. And I've had so much weird stuff happen to me. I have to wonder about the soul thing. Like I feel weird all the time and exhausted here with some of the stuff that goes on. There's been some clearings that I think have helped, but it always seems like something kind of tries to slip back in. Like they said that little golem thing showed up again or whatever, and they removed it. And I'm still amazed how people say they do this stuff from far, far away, like remote kind of stuff. That's kind of new to me and interesting. I think there's something to it, but I'm learning about it, so I don't really, I'm still figuring it out, a lot of it. But I definitely think there's something to it, and they've had some luck here for sure. And I hope to talk about that on the Halloween show tomorrow and everything. Well, it's great having you on. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy your gaming and have a good holiday, and definitely like to get you on again sometime. It's been great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, guys. You guys have a good night, all right?
You too.
All right, you too.
Right.
All right, everybody. You're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM New Orleans. And we got about 2 minutes left. And, William, I was trying to find that thing. I know you sent it to me, that ritual of bad dreams, but if you happen to see it again somewhere or can dig up that email and resend it, please do. I know I got it. Maybe I saved it somewhere, but for some reason the email wasn't coming up in my email. Like I looked at all your emails.
Well, I just looked up in Messenger, because I remember I had messaged Christina about when I'd sent it. Yeah. So I had sort of a target date. of when I sent it, which was December of last year. So I will go back and see if I can find it.
Okay, yeah, just let me know. It should be in my email, so that's what's so weird. I know I pulled up all your emails, but for some reason it's not there. I think it was called I put ritual or orthodox, or been trying different things, but pretty much all your emails came up and it was not there, unless it must be hiding somewhere or got deleted by accident or something weird. But I knew I saved it too, but finding it, that'll be a whole nother ball game on my desktop in there. But I'll look. But if you happen to see it, definitely resend it. If not, it's no big deal. But she may have it somewhere too. I'll have to ask her. But right now I was just trying to OCD look for it, and I should have just not did that right now during the show. But once I get on the thing, buddy.
I might have also sent it by another email. So what I'm going to have to, because I have like 4 or 5 email accounts. So I might have sent it by another email. So I'll have to check my other accounts.
Yeah, just when you can. No rush or anything.
Okay.
What are you doing for Halloween?
I'm not entirely sure what we're doing. I know we're gonna do a little bit of the trick or treating for some of the kids in the neighborhood, just simply because we couldn't do it last year. Yeah. And but I don't know that I'm doing anything that complicated. I think that I know we're gonna carve a pumpkin and tomorrow I've got all this work I've got to do. I don't even really have a day off tomorrow. I've got all this. I've got to do some stuff with my car, and then I've also got to. We're putting shelves up in my office where all this stuff. At some point, you'll see all this stuff cleaned out and up on the wall and stuff.
Nice.
We got to clean.
I know. I got to do similar. I do similar weird stuff with books that are everywhere. Well, hope you have a great Halloween, and hope JoJo has a great Halloween, and hope everybody has a great Halloween. Everybody have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week. There's a native guest. That's with Jay. And then I know you're with the other 2 native guests that come on, but I got to make sure the one native guest is okay. He's up in Quebec, and make sure it works with StreamYard on Apple and all this crap. So it should be okay, hopefully. But all right, everybody, have a good weekend and happy Halloween. Listen to the children of the night. Listen to the beautiful music they make. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye. All right.